The restaurant shimmered with polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the endless clinking of wine glasses. Among the swirl of power suits and glittering gowns, Elena moved quietly, balancing trays with the grace of someone used to being overlooked. To most, she was just another waitress. Disposable. Invisible. That night, the manager made sure everyone was reminded of it. When Elena suggested a better way to handle a high-profile client's order, his face darkened with disdain. In front of the room, he snapped, "Waitresses don't get an opinion. Stay in your place." The words landed like a slap, triggering muffled laughter from a nearby table of executives. Elena lowered her gaze, her hands tightening around the tray. But what they didn't know was that Elena's silence was not weakness. It was strategy. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the very owner of the restaurant they all thought was beyond her reach. And soon, the people who dismissed her would discover that the quiet woman they mocked had the ultimate authority. The humiliation was public. The revenge, however, would be unforgettable. The night had barely begun when the humiliation deepened. Elena continued to move between tables, balancing trays of sparkling champagne and decadent plates of food. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron, contrasted sharply with the guests' tailored suits and glittering gowns. To them, she was invisible, a mere servant drifting at the edges of their importance. But to the manager, she was his favorite target. He thrived on authority, puffing himself up like a peacock, snapping orders in front of others so they could witness his dominance. "Elena, faster," he barked when she paused to ensure a glass was set down gently. "This is not a charity kitchen. Move." His tone carried across the room, earning smirks from a table of executives who seemed to relish watching someone else being demeaned. Elena swallowed the sting. Her face revealed nothing, but inside, a slow-burning fire gathered. Each insult carved deeper, not into her self-worth, for she knew exactly who she was, but into the memory she kept of how people treated those they believed powerless. The evening's humiliation escalated when a VIP guest arrived, a well-known investor whose portfolio could make or break reputations in the city. The manager, desperate to impress, strutted like a king. Yet in his haste, he misread the order and brought out the wrong wine, presenting it with flourish. The guest's nose wrinkled, displeasure flashing in his eyes. Elena, who had overheard the guest's precise request earlier, quietly stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she began gently, "I believe you asked for the Bordeaux, not the Burgundy." Before she could finish, the manager cut her off, his face turning crimson. "Enough," he thundered, slamming the bottle onto the table. The glasses rattled. All heads turned. "Didn't I tell you? Waitresses don't get an opinion. Do your job, and let the professionals handle the rest." His words cracked like a whip in the glittering hall. A ripple of cruel laughter spread among the nearby tables. One woman whispered loudly, "How embarrassing. She doesn't even know her place." The humiliation was sharper than ever, but Elena remained composed. Her eyes lowered, her hands folded at her waist. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed the faintest spark in her gaze. But no one did. They were too busy delighting in her degradation. The manager, sensing his audience, pushed the cruelty further. He leaned toward Elena with a sneer only she could see. "People like you should be grateful just to serve here," he whispered, though the venom in his voice echoed louder than any shout. "Don't ever imagine your opinion matters." Elena stepped back, bowing her head slightly, her silence interpreted as submission. Yet inside, she marked his words like tallies in a ledger. Every insult, every sneer, they were all adding up. She thought of the staff who endured him daily, of the waiters who whispered in the back kitchen about leaving because they could no longer stand his arrogance. Tonight, she decided, the tally would be settled. The guests, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath her calm, continued their chatter. Toasts were made, laughter spilled across the room, and the manager basked in the illusion of control. He strutted from table to table, boasting about the restaurant's prestige, speaking as though he were the architect of its success. He paraded his authority like a crown, unaware of how fragile it truly was. By the time dessert was served, the tension had crystallized. The manager, fueled by wine and ego, announced to the VIP investor, "What makes this place extraordinary is management like mine. We keep the staff in line, and that's why the experience is flawless." His words were loud enough for all to hear, designed to spotlight himself as the mastermind. The investor nodded politely but without warmth. He had seen enough of men like this to recognize hollow arrogance. Meanwhile, Elena remained in the background, quiet, watchful, every detail etched into her mind. The stage was set. The humiliation had reached its peak. The manager believed he had silenced her completely. But what he didn't realize was that his own arrogance had created the perfect opportunity. For soon, in front of all the people he sought to impress, Elena would no longer be the silent waitress. She would be the owner, and the reckoning would be public. The final blow to her dignity came when the manager, seeing her pass by, raised his voice once more. "Clear these plates, Elena. Quickly. And don't drop anything, though with your clumsy hands, that might be asking too much." More laughter followed. This time, even some of the staff looked away, ashamed for her. Elena moved gracefully, her hand steady, her face serene. She collected the plates without a word. Yet her silence was not surrender. It was the pause before revelation. The entire restaurant buzzed with laughter at her expense, but soon, every smirk would vanish. Because the moment was coming, the challenge she could not ignore, the moment that would expose her not as a powerless waitress, but as the true force behind everything they took for granted. Before we see what Elena does next, let me pause for a moment. Stories like this aren't just about revenge or surprises, they're about power shifting in unexpected ways. And if you're enjoying watching the arrogant get humbled and the underestimated rise, then you're in the right place. So here's my question for you, have you ever been in Elena's shoes? Ever had someone dismiss you, only to later realize you were the one holding all the cards? If so, drop a comment below, I'd love to hear your story. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe. Because the best part of these journeys is knowing you're not alone. We're building a community where every underdog finally gets their spotlight. The night reached its peak as the restaurant filled with the sound of clinking glasses, rich laughter, and the soft notes of a string quartet in the corner. The VIP investor was deep in conversation, the staff scurried under pressure, and the manager puffed his chest as though the empire belonged to him alone. Elena continued her silent orbit, serving dishes, refilling glasses, bearing insult after insult with calm precision. But the turning point came unexpectedly. The investor, dissatisfied with the atmosphere, leaned back in his chair and said, "I was told this was the finest restaurant in the city. What makes it so extraordinary? What sets it apart from the rest?" His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Elena before turning back to the manager. The manager seized the opportunity. "What sets us apart," he said loudly, making sure the entire dining room could hear, "is discipline. Staff who know their place, and leadership like mine that ensures they never step out of line." He smirked, his eyes darting to Elena as though to remind her of her humiliation. The words hung in the air, heavy, cruel. Several guests chuckled, nodding at the display of false authority. Elena's heart pounded, not with anger but with certainty. This was the moment. The room had been primed, the insults sharpened, the humiliation complete. And now, the perfect stage had been set. Elena placed the tray she was carrying gently onto a side table. She straightened, her movements calm but deliberate. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clear enough to cut through the chatter. "With respect, sir," she said, looking at the investor, "what truly sets this restaurant apart is its vision, a vision built on respect, creativity, and authenticity. Values that, unfortunately, are often hidden beneath the noise." The manager froze. His face went crimson as heads turned. "Elena," he barked, his voice trembling with fury. "Not another word. You are out of line." But Elena didn't look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the investor, her tone unwavering. "When I opened this restaurant, I wanted it to be more than just a place to eat. I wanted it to be a place where everyone, staff and guest alike, felt valued. Where the details mattered, not because of prestige, but because care was given at every level. The dining room fell silent. Forks paused midway to mouths. The manager's mouth fell open as the words sank in. When I opened this restaurant. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief mixing with curiosity. The investor leaned forward, eyebrows raised. The manager sputtered, desperate to regain control. She's lying. Just a waitress trying to sound important. Don't listen to her. Elena turned to him then, her calm expression unshaken. It's true, she said simply. I am the owner of this restaurant. I chose to work here, quietly, because I wanted to see firsthand how my team treats people when they think no one is watching. Her eyes swept the room, meeting the gazes of stunned guests, before settling back on the investor. And tonight, I've learned a great deal. The air seemed to crackle. Guests whispered to one another, shock painted across their faces. The investor's lips curved into the faintest smile, his interest piqued. The staff in the background stood frozen, unsure whether to continue working or to watch the drama unfolding before them. The manager's hands shook. His arrogance, built brick by brick on cruelty and false authority, wavered. This is absurd, he shouted, his voice breaking. You expect us to believe that you, dressed like that, could possibly own a place like this? Elena tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but carrying the weight of truth. Clothes don't build empires. Character does. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time all evening, Elena was not invisible. All eyes were on her. And though the manager's fury boiled over, his protests grew weaker, drowned by the undeniable presence of the woman he had tried so hard to belittle. The first half of the revelation had landed. The guests were stunned, the manager shaken, the investor intrigued. But Elena was not finished. Her next words and actions would not only shatter the manager's illusion of power but cement her own authority in the eyes of everyone present. The storm had broken. The reckoning was only beginning. The manager's protests grew louder, his voice straining as he tried to claw back the authority slipping from his grasp. This is ridiculous. She's a waitress. She's nothing. His words rang harsh in the hushed atmosphere, sounding more desperate than commanding. Elena let the storm of his anger pass without interruption. When she finally spoke, her words carried a calm authority that silenced him more effectively than any shout. You see, this is exactly why I chose to be here, working among my staff. True leadership is not about standing above others and barking orders. It's about listening, understanding, and building an environment where people feel respected. Her voice reached every corner of the room, steady and unyielding. She turned to the investor, who was watching intently, his chin resting on his hand. I founded this restaurant because I believe people deserved a place where excellence wasn't just in the food or the decor, but in the way we treat one another. I wanted guests to feel welcomed, not judged by appearances. And I wanted employees to feel valued, because when they are, their pride shines through in every detail. The investor's eyes gleamed. And you've been here, working among them, all this time? Elena nodded. Yes. Quietly, because titles can cloud judgment. I wanted to see the truth without the filter of deference. Tonight, I've seen enough. She let her gaze drift toward the manager, whose face was pale with shock and fury. And unfortunately, that truth includes arrogance that has no place here. Gasps rippled through the dining room. Guests who had laughed at her earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, shame replacing amusement. Some exchanged guilty glances, realizing how quickly they had joined the manager in mocking her. The manager tried one last time, his voice trembling. This is slander. A trick. You can't prove. Elena raised a hand, cutting him off without raising her voice. The legal documents are clear. My name is on every deed, every contract, every license. This restaurant exists because I built it from the ground up. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. And I will not allow anyone, manager or guest, to tarnish the values it stands for. The investor smiled openly now, clearly impressed. Remarkable, he murmured, loud enough for others to hear. Rarely do I see such dedication and such humility. You've built more than a restaurant. You've built a legacy." A wave of murmurs followed, this time not of mockery but admiration. The staff, who had long endured the manager's cruelty, began to straighten their backs, their faces lighting with pride. They finally understood. The quiet waitress who worked beside them was the very person who had given them this opportunity. The manager, cornered and trembling, lashed out in a last fit of anger. "You'll regret this. No one will respect an owner who hides in an apron. You'll lose everything." Elena's reply was calm, almost gentle. "Respect is not demanded. It is earned. And tonight, you've shown everyone here exactly why you were never worthy of it." The investor leaned back, applauding softly. Within moments, others joined him. The clapping grew louder, until the entire dining room erupted in applause. Some guests even stood, acknowledging Elena with newfound admiration. The atmosphere had transformed completely. What began as humiliation ended as a stunning vindication. The manager stood frozen, his face twisted in disbelief as the room he once dominated now celebrated the woman he had scorned. The staff, emboldened, whispered among themselves, their relief palpable. They had witnessed justice unfold before their very eyes. Elena accepted the applause with a humble nod. She did not bask in it, nor did she gloat. Her strength lay not in revenge but in revelation. By choosing this moment to reveal her truth, she had not only defended herself, she had redefined what power looked like. The climax had reached its peak, the owner revealed, the tyrant exposed, the tables turned. Yet the true resolution still lay ahead. The applause would fade, and what remained would be justice. And justice, Elena knew, had only just begun. The applause that filled the restaurant eventually faded, leaving behind an air heavy with anticipation. Guests who had moments before laughed at Elena's supposed misstep now looked at her with wide-eyed admiration. The staff stood straighter, their pride restored, as though a burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The manager, however, was left trembling in the very center of it all, his face drained of color, his lips pressed into a thin, desperate line. Elena stepped forward, her movements graceful yet resolute. She addressed the room, her voice warm but firm, carrying the weight of justice. For too long, arrogance and cruelty have been allowed to masquerade as leadership. Tonight has revealed the truth. Leadership is not found in belittling others, but in elevating them. This restaurant exists because of the dedication of every staff member here. And it will continue to thrive because we will not allow disrespect to poison its core. The guests nodded, some murmuring their agreement, others bowing their heads in shame at their earlier laughter. The investor, clearly impressed, leaned toward those near him and whispered, "This is integrity. This is vision." His words spread quickly, amplifying the moment. What had begun as an ordinary dinner now felt like a turning point, both for the restaurant and for everyone who had witnessed the spectacle. Turning to the manager, Elena's tone hardened slightly, though it was still composed. "As of this moment, your contract is terminated. You will no longer be representing this establishment. Your arrogance has no place here." Her words landed like a gavel, final and undeniable. The manager's mouth fell open in shock. He sputtered, desperate. "You can't do this. I built this place. I made it what it is." His protest sounded hollow against the truth everyone now knew. Elena met his glare calmly. "You didn't build it. You exploited it. You didn't nurture excellence, you crushed it. And the only thing you've truly made here tonight is a spectacle of your own downfall." The staff exchanged relieved glances, some even smiling for the first time that evening. One of the junior waiters whispered, finally, his voice tinged with hope. Others nodded, their spirits lifted by the justice unfolding before them. The manager attempted one final act of defiance, slamming his hands onto a nearby table. The glasses rattled, but his show of strength was nothing more than a mask for his fear. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but even as he said it, his voice cracked. The guests no longer looked at him with respect, they looked at him with contempt. His power, once propped up by arrogance and intimidation, had evaporated in an instant. Security staff, who had been waiting discreetly at the edge of the room, stepped forward at Elena's subtle nod. They guided the manager toward the exit, his shouts growing weaker with every step until the heavy doors closed behind him. The sound of his departure was like a release, a toxic weight lifted from the room. Silence followed, but it was not awkward. It was reverent. All eyes turned back to Elena, waiting to see how she would close the chapter she had opened. She did not gloat. She did not revel in the downfall of the man who had humiliated her. Instead, she offered the room something greater. To those who witnessed what happened tonight, she said, I hope it serves as a reminder. True value is never determined by status or appearance. It lies in character, in respect, and in how we treat one another. That is the legacy I want for this place, and the legacy I hope we all carry forward. A swell of applause rose again, this time accompanied by cheers. Guests stood from their seats, clapping enthusiastically. The investor was among the first to rise, his hands coming together in steady, deliberate approval. Soon the entire dining room was standing, their ovation ringing out like thunder. The staff, many of whom had endured the manager's cruelty in silence for months, felt tears prick at their eyes. For the first time, they saw their leader not as a distant figurehead but as someone who walked among them, shared their burdens, and had now publicly defended their dignity. Their pride was no longer hidden. It radiated from their smiles, their posture, their applause. When the ovation finally subsided, Elena gave a humble nod. She did not crave the spotlight, but she accepted the gratitude with grace. Then, turning toward the staff, she addressed them directly. Tomorrow, we begin again. Not as a house divided by fear, but as a team united by respect. Each of you matters here, and together, we will make this place shine brighter than ever. The staff beamed, hope rekindled in their eyes. They believed her, not because of her title, but because of the authenticity that had guided her every word and action. As the guests resumed their meals, the atmosphere transformed. Conversations now carried admiration for Elena, discussions of integrity and leadership, and even apologies whispered to the staff who had been belittled earlier. What had started as an evening of arrogance had ended as a celebration of humility and justice. Later, when the last guest departed and the lights dimmed, Elena stood alone in the dining room. The chandeliers glittered softly, reflecting off the polished floors. She looked around, not with pride in her triumph over the manager, but with gratitude for the lesson revealed. She had been reminded why she built this place, not for prestige, but for people. As she untied her apron and set it gently on a chair, she smiled to herself. Tomorrow, she would return again, perhaps still in uniform, perhaps still among the staff. Because her worth had never come from being recognized. It came from knowing who she was, and leading with integrity, even when no one was watching. And that was the true justice of the night. Arrogance had been stripped away, dignity had been restored, and Elena had proven once more that true power does not roar. It speaks softly, and it lifts others with it. And that is the heart of Elena's story. Respect is not a gift you hand out when it's convenient, it's the foundation that sustains everything. The manager thought control came from belittling others, but in the end, his arrogance crumbled the moment truth came to light. Elena showed us that real strength comes from humility, integrity, and never forgetting who you are. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated at work or in life, only to prove someone completely wrong? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might be the spark someone else needs today. And if you believe in stories where the underdog rises, where kindness defeats arrogance, then follow this channel. Together we're building a community where every voice matters, and where the quietest person in the room might just be the one with the most power.